now the fourth United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. I will not pass this responsibility on to a fifth. I spoke yesterday with President Bush to inform him of my decision. I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
The consequences, they're pretty obvious. Fracture the government, fracture the Afghan security force, the possibility of the Taliban taking over, and an absolute disaster. And what? Do we have to go back in and do it again like we did in Iraq?
General Jack Keane responding there to the decision to pull all troops out of Afghanistan by September 11th of this year. Let's bring in our panel. Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist, and Trey Gowdy, former congressman from South Carolina. Trey, let me start with you. There are two sides to this coin, obviously. The Trump administration, as we mentioned last night, was trying to do this by May 1st, and it was popular politically when the president, the former president now, would talk about it on the campaign trail, bringing troops home. But there is real concern, especially in the hawkish kind of side of the Republican Party, about what happens afterwards.
Yeah, Brett, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, our response should be the same, and luckily for me, mine is. I mean, is the war over, or is just our participation in the war over? I mean, I'm not moved by the number 20 years. Yes, it's a long time, but Brett, so is 17 years. So is 12 years. I mean, there's nothing talismanic about 20. Is the threat of terror. It was a war on terror. Is the terror threat over? What are our intelligence officials telling us? What are our military officials telling us? That's what I want to know. So he's got to make the case for why are you doing it and why now?
Leslie, I guess there are some people who said that every time we said it was conditions-based, the conditions never got there. And at some point, some president had to do what Biden's doing. However, Congressman Mike Waltz from Florida, who served as a special forces soldier over in Afghanistan multiple times, had this to say.
The last thing I want to see is another 9/11. And the best way to, I think, cause another 9/11 to happen is to pull all of our troops out of Afghanistan when half the world's terrorist organizations are still there.
Leslie?
Well, if we just look at al-Qaeda, they are definitely not the al-Qaeda that we knew on 9/11. The Taliban might be stronger, quite frankly, than they were when we first entered Afghanistan. But here's the problem, Brett. You know, a lot of vets who fought in Afghanistan don't feel that way and do feel that there are going to be risks whether we stay or whether we go, because in staying and our presence there, we do not solve the problems that plague Afghanistan. I mean, the Afghan government wasn't even present for the negotiations, which the Taliban were. But speaking of, the government is stronger, but more specifically, the military of Afghanistan is stronger. Their special operations and intelligence are stronger. Joe Biden didn't just campaign on this, as you know. When he was vice president, he fought former President Barack Obama and failed about this very issue. So this is something a lot of Americans want. Certainly there are those, I like to see the consistency, who are against this in the Republican Party with Donald Trump, as they are with Joe Biden. I think it's risky either way, but we just can't stay there because of a potential threat from an outside terrorist group, al-Qaeda, more than the Taliban, which certainly is more of a concern within the borders of Afghanistan.
Yeah, and Ben, Leslie rightly points out that President Trump plowed the political field here that made it a lot easier for President Biden to make this decision.
You know, I have had multiple family members serve in Afghanistan, and what they'll tell you, along with many of my friends in this generation who have gone there, is that this is long past the point where we should have left, and that there is diminishing returns toward being there. And I think that one of the real issues where Washington is completely at odds with the American people is this war. It has been a repeated problem in terms of anyone who tried to engage in a process that would lead to leaving. anything. President Trump had to do it over the objections of all manner of people within Washington. He obviously set that May 1st deadline, which is now being moved back. And in talking to some people who are veterans of that conflict today, many of them were telling me that they think that this can kick is only going to lead to future excuses that will keep us in that country for the foreseeable future. That in the interim, in the time between now and this 9/11 choice of exit, that there will be all manner of justifications made for us to stay there. And honestly, I can't really dispute them on that, given what we've seen in so many other instances of our foreign policy over the past 2 decades.
Well, not only that, but when you put a date on the calendar and the date happens to be 9/11, it seems like some people may take advantage of that or try in Afghanistan to change the circumstances. I want to talk about the circumstances on the southern border. We reported, Trey, earlier that the vice president is heading to Guatemala and Mexico, the Northern Triangle countries as well, to deal with what she calls the root causes. And she said that's what the president has asked her to do. She is not, however, going to the southern border. The last time she did go to the southern border, she talked about that experience a couple of times. Take a listen. So, I mean, is that why they're not going to the southern border? Because of those sound bites and the exponential number of kids down there now?
You know, Brett, I mean, if she's looking for the root cause of our migration crisis, I can save her a trip to Guatemala. Just go to her own campaign website. I mean, if you want to know why people are coming to the southern border, listen to the way Democrats have talked about this country and the Republican Party. No wall, very little border security. We're going to decriminalize access to this country. Sanctuary cities are fine. You're going to have to do a heck of a lot to get deported. I mean, that's why they're coming. I mean, no, she doesn't need to go to Guatemala. I can tell her Belize is doing well, Costa Rica is doing well, Panama is doing well. There are plenty of countries in that region. They're coming here because of people like her and the way they talk about the issue.
Leslie, I'll give you the last word. It's fair to point out that Vice President Pence focused on Northern Triangle countries too, and those countries working with them not to produce people coming to the southern border. But this is different, is it not?
Well, certainly it's different. It's a different administration in a different way. Look, we don't want to just write checks to the government. We want to make sure that the people can benefit. How can the people benefit, and how do we stop them from coming from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala specifically? Those countries are just ridden with crime and poverty. How do we work with these governments? And by the way, the president of El Salvador last week wouldn't meet with a U.S. special envoy. Would he even meet with the vice president, who should visit all of those countries, not just two, and certainly should go to the border as well. But the bottom line is you have to stop the source. And quite frankly, Democrat and Republican going back haven't done that. And hopefully this administration can be successful in that.
We should also point out we invite Vice President Harris and President Biden to come on Special Report pretty much every week. It's a standing invite. So that continues. Up next, is the mainstream media bias getting more intense against Republicans and conservatives? Do you see it? Is it happening? That's next.
3.5 years, do you regret it all the lying you've done to the American people? On
All the
everything.
what?
All the lying, all the dishonesties.
When you hear these remarks, suckers, losers, recoiling from amputees, what does it tell you about President Trump's soul and the life he leads?
Are you being a sore loser? Kaylee, are you here as press secretary or Trump advisor?
The perception of you that got you elected as a moral, decent man is the reason why a lot of immigrants are coming to this country and entrusting you with unaccompanied minors.
Howard Kurtz had a long piece earlier in the show about media, the treatment of President Trump and the treatment of President Biden. President Trump obviously elicited a lot of emotions from some journalists. Some journalists who didn't express them before did in the Trump administration. Did that somehow break the mold and change the dynamic? We're back with our panel. Ben, I'll start with you. I mean, do you sense there is a change, that there's more bias against Republicans and conservatives because of Donald Trump?
I think it's moved well beyond bias, Brett. I think that we now are witnessing a situation where people are behaving in incredibly irresponsible manners against the politicians who they view as being really on the opposite side. I mean, you could view this through the lens of President Trump, but I think that the experience in recent weeks of Ron DeSantis, who has had enormous success in Florida during his response to COVID and was really just smeared in a very obvious way by one of the vaunted institutions of American journalism, 60 Minutes, and they had no compunction about it. They didn't feel like they even needed to apologize, even with criticism from many people who are within that same media lane. Their big problem with the report seemed to be that they were so sloppy about it and really made such an obvious mess of it. This is the kind of thing that Republican politicians should get used to. It is the new reality, and it's not going away, and that should inform the way that they treat these types of questions from the press when there's never going to be any kind of fair shake given to them. They need to approach it with that same level of combativeness and willingness to push back against narratives that are already established and that serve the partisan ends of the Democratic Party.
The 60 Minutes piece was one of the bullet points that we kind of put on the wall there. Here's a piece of that and what they did in the cleanup. Leslie, I know you're a Democrat. You speak to a lot of Democrats. Do you sense that there's a change here? That was kind of egregious.
Quite frankly, I've seen a change in journalism, and I used to be a journalist. I always say I'm not a journalist anymore. I opine, and people forget. There's a big difference. There is a huge and should be a line in the sand. Journalists should get asked the questions and get the answers, report the facts. People like myself strategize, opine, analyze, and talk on a talk show about it on radio. But at the end of the day, I have to say I have seen a difference since President Trump was president, in all honesty. And I think part of the reason for that, Brett, was his attitude toward a free press, or lack thereof, and his attitude and his treatment of reporters. And I think after that, that in a sense put them on the defensive. So were they kinder and gentler to Joe Biden? Perhaps, because he's been kinder and gentler to them? Could be.
Trey?
Yeah, Brett, I mean, Trump may be the last exhibit in the trial, but he wasn't the first. I mean, look at Romney and McCain. They couldn't stand either one of those guys until they started criticizing Republicans. They sure as hell didn't like them when they were running for president. So the media likes three kinds of Republicans: the ones that vote with Democrats, the ones that lose, and the ones that die. And dying is just a little bit too much for most of us to curry favor with the media.
All right, we will leave it there, but it's a story about press that we're going to definitely continue to follow. Finally, tonight, a look at tomorrow's headlines tonight with the panel. Ben, first to you.
Kamala Harris maintains that putting babies in plastic pods is completely different, nothing alike putting babies in cages. She denounced it from the get-go when she was running for president. This time around, she's going to have to find a way to defend it.
Leslie.
Cancel culture? Republicans vow to boycott corporations who signed a 2-page ad in the New York Times opposing discrimination in voting rights.
Ah, the cancel culture. There you go. That headline. Wonder what paper that's in. All right, Trey, you're up.
Justice Stephen Breyer fires law clerks and hires food tasters as retirement talk swirls by Democrats.
So the question is, do they nudge them out or don't they?
It's hard to get rid of somebody who's got a lifetime job, so federal judges don't listen to much of anybody, but they keep trying.
Panel, that's pretty good. Quick headlines. Thank you.